It starts with us of making sure that we're creating environments that people feel heard, seen, and valued, and then beyond that, challenged. It's important to realize you need to make sure whatever you're doing is an extension of who you are or your passion. You have to really love what you do. And then everything else is just an outcome of that. Captain, it's really forget the fish, give people money and let them build what they want, is my view. Exactly. Yeah. Like, if you really want to make change in this world, you have to do it through capital. We have so much money to solve most of our problems. We need to, one, get innovative. You said, why don't we? Innovative with our capital stacks. So private, public, deployment, but also we need to create ecosystems, whether it's private markets to public markets or efficient public market ecosystems. Yeah. And you do that by making sure you have thriving businesses.
Hi, it's Ekezie. Welcome to Limitless. In this series, we spotlight the most incredible young people from across the world who are pushing boundaries and inspiring excellence. You're definitely in the right place if you're a young person who is looking to defy the boxes that have been placed on you by yourself and by other people. Here, we believe that your potential is truly limitless. Please like this video and subscribe if you enjoyed it to see more. Now, let's get into the video. Awesome. It's really good to be chatting with you today, Daouii. I've looked forward to this. And I'm saying this again, but I really genuinely mean it. And I'm excited for us to chat for the next 45 minutes or so.
Likewise, I'm super excited and happy to have you here in my home. This has been something that I've been looking forward to for some time.
It's very comfortable. Yeah. I feel very comfortable. And it's one of my more comfortable interviews. So I'm very excited to dig in. Why don't we start with this? Tell us a little bit more about you and what's the conditions around your childhood. Where did you grow up? How was that? And yeah, it'll be good to learn more.
So my name is Daouii Abouchere. I don't like the word multi-hyphenated, but there's no better way of describing it. So I work in finance, really trying to transform finance to become more sustainable and people-oriented by day. I'm involved in the charity space, so on the board and vice chair of the RISE board for the Princess Trust, and then do some stuff around advisory. And the essence of everything that I do is rooted in impact. And I'm a bit of a rebel with a cause, as I like to call myself. It's really how can we create equitable solutions for people and give them the power and the capital to do what they do best. Yeah. The whole concept, I remember growing up, the whole teach a man to fish and give a man to fish concept. And it's really forget the fish, give people money and let them build what they want is my view. Exactly. Yeah. Like, if you really want to make change in this world, you have to do it through capital. Yeah. So that's my personal belief. Grew up in a very loving home. My mother is my inspiration. She instilled in me values that if I was even a sliver of a woman she is, I would be very happy. Wow. And really on this belief and notion that you could do absolutely anything in this world if you put your mind to it. And I didn't realize how powerful that view was. At times it gets annoying when, you come home and somebody gets like 3 percentage points higher than you. Yeah. And you hear, they have eyes, a nose, and a mouth like you. So where did that, exactly. And you would roll your eyes. But as an adult, I think that concept has really driven my view in this world. Everybody has 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth like you. So if they could do it, you could do it. So it's really allowed me this bigger than myself view of the world and what's possible. My brothers keep me grounded, quite literally and physically. And I love them to bits and pieces. And they've kind of been my guiding compass. I grew up with 4 brothers as the only girl. Wow. So very protected, I guess. One would call it that. Another person would say tough skin, induction by fire hose. But they really instilled in me this belief and philosophy of like words, like sticks and stones may break your bones, but words won't. Yeah. And this tough like skin, but also this notion that equity. I might be a girl, but I could do anything they could do, probably twice as better oftentimes. They might not want to admit it. So really grew up in a house that instilled in me this view that there is more to this world than what I see every day. But like humility, gratitude, and like community were all instilled in us in a very young age. So those are things that I still very much hold on to. And thank God with everything that's been achieved to date. But really thinking about collaboration, community, humility, because tomorrow is not promised. Yep. And yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And geographically, where was growing up? Was that here in the UK?
No, you might hear a non-British twang. On a good day, I'll say Thursday, and people roll their eyes. But I grew up between Canada and the Middle East.
Oh, awesome.
So back and forth quite a bit,
Yeah.
but predominantly my academics have all been in Canada. So
Yeah.
Canadian accent, but a British twang on a good day.
I hear it. That's awesome. And for career, like let's walk through that just a little bit. You deeply care about sustainability, especially within finance. And one of the things I actually want to go deep into is what you mentioned now. The best way to create change is through capital. Is that something you've always known? Is that something you got to know through your career and just seeing how the world works and people who have capital are able to deploy that against their worldview? Did you know that before you got into career?
No. So I started my career, and bless my little heart, I thought I was going to be a diplomat or a human rights lawyer at The Hague, and nobody was going to tell me anything about anything else. It was it. That's it.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to briefly work at the UN and shadow our Canadian ambassador at that time there. And it was through that experience. I loved it. It was like, and I was a Model UN kid, by the way.
Oh,
so head of debate, head of Model UN. I had a binder with every UN resolution past to date on a subject matter. And that was it. Like, this was my dream.
Yeah.
And when I got to spend some time at the UN, it was there, I think, rejection is redirection. And this was not necessarily rejection, but I was sitting with our ambassador, very eager-eyed, like, it was the dream. And I was like, do you think I have a career here? And he looks at me dead in the face and he goes, I think you would be an amazing diplomat, but a horrible bureaucrat.
Wow.
And
that's a compliment if you...
In hindsight. But at that time...
That's a compliment.
At that time, I was like, what do you mean? I'll be an amazing bureaucrat. Not realizing that it was, you know. And he said, you want to make change. Sometimes you try to tell me what to do on a subject matter. Go off into the private sector and spend some time there because you can really achieve impact in a shorter term time horizon. And a lot of these larger multinational institutions have a way of how they go about things.
Yeah.
They're longer term time horizons. There's multi-stakeholders. It's not like you decide something today and it's enacted tomorrow. Then I moved into global governance and policy. And again, this whole view was everything that I wanted to do was making the world a better place. And I wanted to change the world.
Sorry, just to situate the timelines, when was this? Was this after graduating from university?
So this was around graduating university.
Okay.
And it was this view, or slightly before, but it was this view that I wanted to change the world. And the world was meant to be changed, right? And naturally, you think the first thing is the UN or the human rights, like law and trying to make it equitable. And then I got to meet Fatima Bensouda, who was a chief prosecutor at the ICJ. What a power woman, but also a woman who speaks truth to power and truth in general. And it was a lunch with her that really encapsulated for me what it means to be a human rights lawyer at The Hague. The lack of jurisdiction, some of the challenges around mandates, trying to find what is equitable or justice. And I just kind of, a lot of it seemed interesting, but there wasn't something in my stomach that was burning. And I'm a political economist by academic training, studied political science and economics, really focused on political economy. And I just thought at one point, I was like, this whole saving the world thing is clearly not working out. I'd want to understand the political drivers of the market. So when there's a geopolitical conflict, markets rally, things are changing. How is that all working? And that's the true academic in me. I love learning philosophy, debating, really getting into the core of issues. So I thought this whole saving the world thing is not working for me. So let me just go and figure out this trading floor stuff and figure out how businesses run. And I've been, I think, very privileged in my life, or lucky. I think more luck and privilege to be running into really interesting people that I've been afforded a level of mentorship from. And one of my mentors, I adore him to bits and pieces. He is the person you go to when you don't want to hear the actual advice you need.
You don't want to hear the advice you need?
You need. Okay. As in, he just sells it to you like it is. And sometimes you go, oh. And it was a conversation with him, and it's a bit controversial. But he said, Daouii, do you see many young people of color wanting to enact change? I said, yes. He's like, do you see a lot of people that are not of color, young, enacting change, or, grassroots? Not as much. He goes, do you see older people of non-color wanting to enact change? I said, tons. How many foundations are there, right? And he said, do you see a lot of people of color, older, enacting change? And his point was not so much about the racial disparities, but really around how change is enacted. And his point he was trying to make to me was capital.
Yeah.
Foundations are able to have money to create structural shifts.
Yeah.
And yes, grassroots movements are super important, and there's a place for them, and they have a role in society. But if you're thinking about systemic changes and really like changing the trajectory of things, if I think about it, a lot of it is driven, especially in development and aid, is through foundations or non-for-profits. And now we see more of the innovation in the private sector work in emerging markets. But at that time, a lot of it is through foundations. And you had multitude of foundations doing really interesting things, whether on the continent, outside, on the continent of Africa, outside of the continent. But again, all of it was driven through the fact that they had money to deploy to these things. And that was like my first aha moment, light bulb. And then on the trading floor, I remember working on a couple of trades with my colleagues as a junior person, trying to learn and stuff. And you're seeing these numbers, these zeros, and like, you're like, wow, there is so much money that runs through capital markets on a day-to-day. We could solve all of our problems, if not most, because we have the money to do so.
Why aren't we?
Because capital markets needs things to be structured a certain way. And that's where my career philosophy began. We have so much money to solve most of our problems. We need to, one, get innovative. You said, why don't we? Innovative with our capital stacks. So private, public, deployment. But also we need to create ecosystems, whether it's private markets to public markets or efficient public market ecosystems. And you do that by making sure you have thriving businesses, right? So this linear chain, for me, that's when it all became kind of crystal clear. And my mom will be the first to tell you, I'm not the most patient human being. So for me, it was, okay, this is really interesting. And with markets, things move faster. So that's kind of where my life philosophy, career philosophy kind of evolved. And I've ended up in the space I am now. And I love what I do. I get to combine what I initially thought I could do at the UN of making the world a bit of a better place with real like capital deployment and capital reallocation. And thinking about things in a more holistic manner than how they've historically been.
That makes a lot of sense. And from your privileged position where you get to see a much broader view of the world, the issues we face, and the most important priorities for us now, I think there's competing priorities: climate change, wars, hunger, child nutrition, things like that. Where, if we had $10 billion as a universe to deploy, where would you deploy it?
It's a very good question. I'll start by saying all those issues are intertwined. Right? Climate change, poverty, war, all of it. I like to think of, especially these broad sustainability macro issues, as a spider web. They're all interlinked, right? The people that are going to be at the front of the climate crisis and facing it are the ones that oftentimes are also dealing with war, famine, strife, and a bunch of other things. So I would actually deploy them in grassroots incubation, startups. And what I love about whenever I look at the continent in Africa, it's solutions made by people who are facing those issues. So other economies had the Industrial Revolution. That kind of skipped the continent. But now when you think of digitization, the use of, for example, drones for pharmaceuticals, drones for highway traffic, drones for delivery, I really get excited around a lot of the digital solutions that they're building to their infrastructure crisis. Climate is one that is a collective issue. And I think there needs to be a more broader, collective, multi-stakeholder approach to it. Now, things around famine, things around that impact what people eat, their shelter, and their livelihood, you do so by giving people, like, one, the knowledge and the know-how to build their solutions, and then the capital to back it, right? And that's where I think if we had 10 billion, I'd focus on building incubation and like startup ecosystems in places that are at most or most sensitive, and really focus on giving people the tools to build their own solutions to these things. Interesting.
And is it because of the potential of these solutions to generate the socioeconomic prosperity that they need? Because one of the views I've heard, and I believe this to a very significant degree, is if you want to get more people to care about climate change, then let's just lift them out of poverty and they'll start to pay attention to these things like mad? Like, is that something you believe and you allude to when you say these things are intertwined?
I'll start by saying there isn't one solution to climate change.
Of course.
For example, in the Western and developed economies, I hate those words, but I'm using them here. But, for lack of better description, like in what we talk about as an energy crisis in these parts of the world are very different to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
I was having a really interesting conversation recently with a friend, and they're based out of South Africa. And they're like, this whole energy transition stuff is really interesting, but South Africa operates on an electricity grid. We barely have consistent electricity. So talking about, climate change and energy transition and all these topics are interesting, but if I can't heat my home or heat my food or heat my home or charge my phone or charge my car, I'm going to find other non-sustainable methods that are cheap also. Yeah. So I say that there isn't a singular view, and that's why for me, I'm hyper passionate about grassroots efforts, because somebody in Mali using a coal gas to cook food is not the same, in my perspective, degree as a coal-powered electricity plant in Canada. Yeah. Right. Or a coal-fired or coal-fired anything in other parts of the world. So really giving people what they need to develop their own solutions. And it goes back to this principle of no one knows their problem better than the people facing the problem. Yeah. So why not equip the emerging technologies and everything else, give them the know-how, work with the best-in-class, people to build those solutions for them. Yeah. And that's where when you look at Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, there's so much innovation coming out of those places because it's people, oftentimes young people, going back, using that know-how and knowledge to build solutions.
That makes sense. One of the things you said when you were describing your experience with the chief prosecutor at The Hague was you didn't feel a fire burning in your stomach. And I thought that was very interesting. Is that a way you make decisions? Do you think it's some sort of signal for what you should or should not do? And has that lingered with you through the rest of your career till date?
So I'm all about intuition. Yeah. And I listen to it whenever I can. Sometimes I think, maybe there's something. And to be honest, every time I've ignored my intuition, it's bit me. Yeah, me too. So I think it's a deep intuition. And when I say like energy or fire burning in my gut, it was this. So I'm oftentimes in career, I always say to people, whoever you meet and those people you're talking to, think about if you were in their shoes day to day carrying out the jobs that they just explained to you. Would you be happy? And I think she does remarkable work. Let me be very clear. But the idea of not having the jurisdictional power to execute on mandates that deep down inside would come to justice would do my head right in. Again, going back to that patience thing. I'm not patient. And I think she does remarkable work. But for me, and again, she's in a senior role. So she's built a career doing this. I think about, would I be 10, 15, 20 years happy kind of going through the ringer to get to that point? I thought it was interesting, but it didn't give me that sign me up tomorrow.
Yeah, not enough reason to maybe wake up every morning and have it pep in your step. Your career is really focused, at least right now, on making finance more sustainable. Why is it even important that finance becomes sustainable? And one of the things that you've also alluded to, and I've heard a lot of people say, is there's a lot of especially in this conversation around sustainability globally, it's become politicized. Why is that the case? And great cause for polarization. Why is that the case?
I think more broadly, finance, I struggle with the word sustainability in finance. I always start with ethical finance and doing good and doing no harm is a first base principle. And when you think about a lot of these companies globally, they're domiciled in London, Toronto, New York, Geneva. But then their global supply chains and their manufacturing is in emerging markets. Yeah. And a lot of these, especially in resource-intensive industries, are based in emerging markets. I always say, if you want to solve a solution, you solve it at the root. And the root is getting corporations to realize their value, like the issues around their supply chain, and do better around it. Yeah. And that, again, when I was on the trading floor, so Canadian capital markets are mainly propped up by oil and gas and Canadian economies and metals and mining. So you got a lot of exposure to those kind of companies. And I remember one of them, I remember Googling, and there was just like human rights violations, environmental issues. They were
You don't
being
want to get
fined. And
into
I was
that.
just like, what's going on here? But at that time, capital markets those things were not credit issues, or they were not seen as, equity issues. And they weren't kind of first-based principles. So I was like, but if a company does good business and thinks about their environmental footprint, thinks about their stakeholder engagement, that is intrinsically a better company altogether, right?
Why is that not obvious why has it not been obvious to companies for a very long time? That's the case.
Because for the longest time, those aren't questions investors were asking.
I see.
So going back to your question on why do you focus on the capital side, is if you really, in my personal belief, and it's a bit, I guess, of a realist view, but if you want to make people move, you do it where it hurts, their pocketbooks, or where it doesn't hurt, their pocketbooks. And my view is really, if you want to change stuff, you do it by dangling the carrot and the stick, right? Do you want more access to capital now? And we've come a long way, I think, in the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, obviously.
And it's, again, through capital. Your cost of capital will increase if people deem you not to be doing better business or good business.
But why do investors care more now about ESG specifically? It's it's become a much more significant requirement for how well your stock price performs. Why do people care more about this? Do you think it's just the global awareness about the challenges we face and the long-term consequences, or I don't know? It's just a political statement.
No, well, I think it's the view that now you're operating in a stakeholder form of capitalism.
Yeah.
Stakeholders and even consumers, now we've seen in the I'll go to COVID, right? How many companies were consumers spotlighting and boycotting due to issues around labor, due to issues around human rights, due to issues around environmental. So consumers, at the end of the day, on the demand side, consumers are very sensitive to these issues. But even when you think about the supply side, you cannot have a sustainable 10, 20, 30-year corporate strategy if you don't take into account these things.
Yeah.
Resources are not finite. Or infinite, sorry.
Yeah.
Even humans. Most people think, workplaces, fine. No, these are not infinite resources. They're finite.
Yeah.
So if you can take care of these things, you actually are, and you're also being, in my personal opinion, being able to think of strategy better, business strategy. Where can you lean in? Where might you need to actually think about risk in a different way? Supply chains, because of globalization, are so interconnected, right? And if you start thinking about these things, I just think strategically, you're just a better business.
Yeah.
So yes, there's an element where these things have become a bit politicized. I personally don't care for the politics.
Yeah.
It's just, I focus on trend lines, not headlines. And the trend line is very clear. Climate change is impacting everybody, businesses, people. COVID heightened that human health issues impact all of us. I think we were all isolated for how long?
Yeah.
Supply chains halted. These things do matter and they do impact businesses. How do you take care of them?
Yeah. Let's come back down to you, just a little bit more, because, one thing I keep thinking about through all of this is your work is a significant extension of things you deeply believe. And for people watching this, do you think it's important that our work is a reflection of our moral personhood? If we could afford that and if we could choose, of course, because not everyone has that luxury.
I think your work should be an extension of you and your passions. Whether it's your personal conviction of the world, whether it's your artistic expression, but it should be something you deeply care about. And I say this because the days when you don't want to get out of bed, you need to find something within you that gets you, or when if it's tough and you're trying to pivot or you're trying to figure it out, it has to be this belief deep down inside of you that you're doing something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And you're building something.
Yeah.
If you do not have that, I think it becomes very challenging to define what success is for yourself and also do the tougher things and there's parts of my career and my job that there's things I did not have the passion. I'm not always burning with this internal gas chamber in my stomach, but I do know there's a North Star. And you need to define that, I think, as a young person, as a person in general, or else you could tend to fall into complacency.
Yeah. I see. And for you, what's your most updated articulation of your North Star? I feel like for me that changes like every 2 years. Still
Yeah.
similar trends, but like there's an update to it due to significant new information, discovery of myself. But for you, what's that?
Currently, it's how do you change systems? My North Star is really focused on system change or create systemic opportunities. So I got involved with the Princess Trust, the RISE program at the Princess Trust, because it's all focused on youth innovation
Yeah.
and focused on giving young people who, for whatever circumstances, did not have the linear trajectory of going to school, going to university, getting good grades, and then getting a job, and then or starting in a company, or that linear trend.
Yeah.
And that's not a fault of their own. I don't believe so. We're all born into circumstances we can't control. But what they do is they allow these young people to rejig or hold the steering wheel of their life again.
Yeah.
I went to an event and one of the young people stood up and honestly, I cried. He said, all my friends are either dead or in jail. And I just bought my mom a flat in Chelsea and I run a very successful multi-six-figure business because of the Princess Trust invested in me. And he went on to tell the story of his life. Crying. Like, it was so powerful. And for me, I look at him as an example of how can you amplify that? How do you scale that? Because there's so many young people, whether it's, things that have happened recently, COVID and others, or things that are not their fault, circumstance, that want to do something positive. They have these ambitious ideas, but they either don't have the role models or they don't know where to begin. And then they just kind of get disenfranchised.
Yeah.
So how do you create that systemic change? So that's going back to your North Star question. My North Star is really like, how do you make system changes? And then how do you scale them?
Yeah. One thing that that came to mind as I heard you speak is how do we create a society and do this in our generation where we don't need, for example, the trust and organizations like that to give people hope? How do we bring it right down to the home to ensure that every single person that we're creating and releasing out into the society is someone who is enabled, is capable in very many ways, emotionally, physically, educationally? What do you think we need to do differently to get to that point where we no longer rely on external organizations like this to get the work done?
I think one of the first things that popped to mind, and going to gut, I'm just going to use my gut and just say it here, is actually listening to people and holding space for them. I think passion comes in a lot of forms, and people showcase their passion very differently. And especially as now, I can't believe it, we're like aunties and uncles, and now we're like the older generation. But, when you're seeing people talk about things they're passionate about, and then sometimes you'll hear someone at the end be like, oh, but it's all like a silly dream. Actually listen and motivate them.
Yeah.
It starts with us of making sure that we're creating environments that people feel heard, seen, and valued. And then beyond that, challenged. And then think about, how do I help this person? Right? Or see things differently. Or what could be an experience that would help them refine this thinking? Or what could be a book that I could, as simple as, what is something that I can add to this person's passion that may leave them a bit better off?
Yeah.
Or see things differently. And that's something that I think, going back to family values like community, I wouldn't be where I am today without community. I'd be the first to say it. And a lot of my successes are afforded to people taking a chance in me and believing me.
Yeah.
And that continues to be true. So how do you pay it back? And it doesn't have to be these big statement things. It could be as small as listening to someone's idea.
Yeah.
And then at the end, just saying, okay, you know what? Let's take a pen and paper. And how would that become profitable?
Yeah.
Just something simple as that. Give them the piece of paper. What was it? Wasn't it Facebook or Amazon was created on the back of a napkin?
Yep.
It's those types of exercises of allowing people to see bigger than themselves.
Yeah. One similarity between us is we, just like you, I have parents. My mom is incredibly, from a very young age, both of my parents held my siblings and I to the highest standards possible. Grew up in a household where there's just very little room for foolishness, like even childish foolishness. There's only so many mistakes you can make in a month, like not that many. And of course, and now that I'm older, I'm 25 years old, I understand very deeply how that helped prepare me for the world. I grew up in a small town in Nigeria, and sounds like that's something that you had. A mom who deeply believed in you, held you very accountable to the highest standards of your potential. How important do you think it is for parents, in household where we grow up into, to be those people for us, and for us, people in our generation who already are parents, who will be parents in a few years, what can we do better for us to create the sort of society that we want?
I'll start off by saying a massive shout out. And like when you're younger, you don't appreciate these things. You're just like, they're so strict or they're so tough. And,
like me, why?
and now as I'm older, I'm like, hindsight, I'm like, thank you.
Yes,
like, thank you, So start off by saying, like, parenting is not easy. And a massive hats off to our parents, their parents, and some of them, especially if they're immigrants or have left their home countries to explore new ventures, they haven't had it easy, right? So a massive gratitude to them and everything that they've done despite their circumstances. Parenting isn't easy, and I can't speak, I'm not a parent, so it's always sometimes easier to do something when you don't have to do it.
From a distance.
Exactly.
It's convenient.
But I would say discipline. And also making sure kids believe there is something bigger to them and allowing them the room to be creative in the imagination. Like I didn't know what I would be doing when I was younger. And if you ask my mom, every week it was something new, until a certain point, every week it was something new. And both my parents allowed me that space to explore and figure it out. But they also ensured that when there was foolishness involved, like there was one time, I was probably 7 or 8. In my head, I put it that I wanted to be a chef. Imagine how that went down. And I was convinced. And I was just like mucking about in the kitchen. And I was like, I want to be a chef. I was like, that's great. Do that on your hobby. Now focus on your studies,
That's so funny.
Like she didn't say go off and be a chef, right? And I am also slightly thankful for that because I do have artistic passions. I love fashion. And I love design. And if I didn't work in finance, I'd probably work in fashion. And everyone in my life would tell you that. But right now, I don't have the same like passion for fashion. Like if I had to do fashion 24/7, I don't think I would be happy. So it's really guiding your kids, allowing that creative expression and freedom, but in controlled manners, but also guiding them to something bigger and dreaming bigger. And again, principles, humility, honesty, collaboration, just allowing them to be really great people as a base foundation and then build from there. But I'm not a parent, so take that with a grain of salt.
Of course. It sounds like, what you're saying is parents have to find a way to make their children believe that there's something special about them and that's bigger than them. So of course, that's the line between humility and self-aggrandizement. When you think you're special and the best thing in the world, but you're not humble, you can go down really badly. For people who have the potential to do very many things, like you wanted to be a human rights lawyer, wanted to work at the UN, now you work in finance and in a very specific aspect of finance, sustainability within finance. In many ways, you're a pioneer in that field. And how do people who have very many different interests figure out what to ultimately stake themselves on? Because it's this constant battle of, I can do this and this, and this and this. How do you know that one to, go all in on, and work on?
I think the all in part comes through doing. But in essence, one of the best advice I've ever been given in my career was there's 5 things, I'm going to try to remember the 5th, I always forget it. There's 5 things in life or a career can give you. Impact, fame, power, wealth, or balance. Yes, that's a 5th one. I might have to correct that. But you have to decide which combination of these do you want.
Not all.
You can say all, but that limits your trajectory or the things you do. So for example, if you want power, money, fame, right? You might not go to work in an NGO. And that is fine, right? But if you want balance and you want impact, you might go work at an NGO. Well, maybe not balance, but if you want impact, you might go to an NGO. And there's nothing wrong with going to an NGO, by the way, but it's just, it allowed me to really be clear on what I wanted to do in my career. And anything in this, like any type of job comes back to these 5 base principles, right? Impact, fame, money, power, or balance. And they're not always consistent. So sometimes you might have 4 of those and balance is important, but balance goes out the window.
Yeah.
I personally believe in the 10,000 hours philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
You got to put in the work. Does that come with balance? Debatable.
Yeah.
But really figuring out what combination of those 5 are important to you. And you got to be honest with yourself. I think, personally speaking, as women, sometimes we shy away from saying money is important because you've always been taught to kind of not say that out loud. But it is important.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So if you want to earn money in your career, there is a certain type of careers that you would have to look at, right? If you don't care for money, that's great. Even men, if you don't care for money, great. But then again, you might not go down the investment banking route. It's also interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess a long-winded way of saying those 5 principles, figure out which one's important to you. And then it allows you to shift. So I said I love fashion.
Yeah.
But in fashion, you're not, especially early days, you're not going to get paid.
Yep. Yeah.
Money was important to me, right? Or earning a living was important to me. So I knew that was a passion I could do on the side through the way I dress, what I do, but it wasn't going to be something I was going to pursue 100%.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You've seen a lot of success in your life at, from a very young age. How hard have you had to work, like practically? Because I think for many people don't know how hardworking people work. Seriously, most people don't have a picture of that until they actually experience that for the first time and they think you're crazy. But how hard have you had to work in the past, say 10 years, practically?
So hard that it's become an extension of myself. Like, if you ask me this question, I'm like, but that's just standard.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's like I don't have
Yes.
Like I don't have a quantifiable like to tell you, oh, I put in this many hours, and I can tell you it was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of putting myself out there, coffees, lunches, going to networking events, conferences. I guess I boil it down to it's consistently going above and beyond.
Yeah.
Right. And the biggest point I would say is none of it, like there's no recipe for success. And even now, I think my definition of success has fundamentally changed to when I was much younger. And it's important to realize you need to make sure whatever you're doing is an extension of who you are or your passion, because there is not going to be this grand finale or a ribbon at the end that's going to say, you've crossed the finish line.
Congrats.
Success is yours. Here's whatever that your definition of success is. It's you have to really love what you do. And then everything else is just an outcome of that.
But, just to press you on that, because I feel like we maybe need a marker for, okay, are we doing well in life? For some people, it's how many zeros are in their bank. But for you, 50 years from now, looking back, what would success look like? Like, oh, Daouii, I've lived a pretty successful life. What would that picture look like for you?
2 words come to mind. First is freedom. And freedom of choice, freedom to explore, to be able to pick and choose what I do and have a portfolio of things. So I'm not defined by one thing. And then the second thing is impact, but really of being able to say, I helped or I was a catalyst for this person or this organization to think things differently. Or I invested in these companies that are doing really good disruption. Or I was able to change or do something systemically to enable scale and impact at scale. So those are the 2 things that come to mind. But first is freedom. Really just soft life.
Yeah, soft life.
Soft life,
I love that. That's very funny.
And then it's everything else works around that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, love that very much. And finally, are there things that you wish you spent more time doing now that you don't do as much?
I'm trying to do more of. So one of my biggest goals this year was to spend more time with my family and my friends.
Yeah.
And I think when life gets busy, it's always easy to kind of drop both of those or just say, yeah, if I call my parents once a week, it's okay.
Yeah, because you think they are sorted.
They'll just
always be there. Yeah.
And friends as well, right?
Yeah.
And for me now, I've realized if I don't call my parents at least once a day, I don't feel well.
Wow. That's a great place to be.
And it's just a quick phone call. Like sometimes quick is enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes like you call them and you're like, maybe today was not a good idea, but it's like, love you, see you later. But they're well, right?
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally on the belief that tomorrow isn't promised to anyone. and you never know what's going to happen in someone's life, especially those you love.
Yeah.
So make sure you're checking in on them, and also challenging, especially with friends. My favorite is when you ask someone, "How are you?" and the baseline response now is good,
Yeah.
and people shrug it. I'm like,
when you asked me how I was earlier, did I say I was good? Now I feel like I was more
yeah,
of
you
those
did.
people.
It's okay.
so
We'll dig into it.
we'll deal with that.
But it's asking people like, "How have you been?" or "How are things?" And if they say good, be like, "But really, like, what was good about it?"
Yeah.
And challenge that perception, because sometimes I think we don't share enough with each other or those that
Yeah.
we love. And life is tough as it is, so it doesn't need to be tougher.
Yeah. Yeah. Finally, for someone who is watching this conversation and is feeling stuck professionally, personally, and looks up to you and your story as some sort of symbol of inspiration, what word do you have for them to potentially get themselves unstuck and get going?
Oof. So many things come to mind. I would first start with know yourself. Genuinely, and do the work. Because sometimes, so I said I was afforded a lot of great mentors, and I go on diatribe, so bear with me.
Of course.
One is a really good friend of mine, and I remember there was one time, and this was when the whole diplomacy thing wasn't working out as I wanted it to. And look, I speak about my career in very snippets, but there's been a lot of turmoil in the pivoting, right?
Yeah.
And pivoting is never easy.
Never.
And some people see it as failure. I've learned to accept that pivoting is not failure, but redirection. But I've had to learn that. It's easier said than done sometimes. But I was just ranting about how it's not working out and how I don't know what I'm going to do with myself and blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to go find a job for a job's sake and all this stuff. And he looks at me and he goes, "I have no doubt in my mind that you are going to be successful. Yeah. Zero. Yeah. But one thing I am sure about, the only thing that's going to stand in your way is yourself." When I say reality gave me a slap, I was like,
backhand.
Like, I had to catch myself mid. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And he is a personality that is very commanding. And when he says things, they cut. But it's come from a well-intentioned.
Yeah.
And I had to sit with myself with that one. And I just thought, I was like, actually, what are these limiting beliefs that I'm having? So I start by saying, whatever it is you want to achieve in this world, make sure it's coming from a place of passion and purpose, but more importantly, that it aligns to who you are as a person. Because some things in this world don't align to who we are, and that's fine, but it's the universe redirecting.
Yeah.
So patience, knowing yourself, community, and having people that can check you when you need it. Like that friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Daouii, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today and for having me in your home.
Thank you for being so limitless and paving the way for all of us.
Thank you.
And this has been such a treasure and a joy, so thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daouii.